Hi, everybody, and welcome to BRC-A's Buying Power webinar series. I can just see the numbers rising now as people are joining. So we'll just get off to a bit of a start here now for this webinar. Today's webinar is on certificates, additionality, and iRECs, and what we're looking at happening beyond 2030. And we have a wonderful panel here today to join in the conversation and to help us understand a little bit more about certificates. It can be a confusing space, and particularly as it's a changing space at the moment, it's not absolutely certain what's going to be happening in the future, particularly beyond 2030. That's obviously really important in terms of the value of those certificates to your business and to your sustainability initiatives as a buyer. And so today, as always, we will commence with a little bit of a summary of where we're up to and what we're doing here at BRC-A. I'll do that really quickly. Then I'm going to be handing over to John Prendergast, our Technical Director here at BRC-A. You might want to wave, JP. And he will be the host of today's, or the moderator for today's wonderful panel. We also have Bridget Weston, our Project Officer. Hi, Bridget, online as well. We will have time to answer some questions towards the end. So we will take questions also. If you want to put them, I think it's in the Q&A rather than the chat, or the other way around. Bridget, I can never remember which one you're allowed to do, but it'll be plainly obvious which one Zoom will allow you to do today. So just pop those questions in and we can try and address those as we go along. Or we may also just save them for the end. So today, just really quickly, I'll introduce today's wonderful panel of industry experts. Today we have Julia Quixley. She is Manager of Marketing and Product Development at Snowy Hydro. Julia has 20 years experience in commercial roles in strategy, marketing, product development, contracting management, and negotiations across NGOs and the energy industry. So lots and lots of expertise there. We also have Lisa Zembrot. Wonderful that you could join us. Lisa is Principal and Senior Director at Schneider Electric, a long-term member of BRC-A. Lisa leads Schneider Electric's sustainability consulting business and has nearly 20 years experience also in energy and renewables, and is an industry recognised and passionate advocate for renewable energy and climate policy, and serves as Vice President of the Energy Efficiency Council's board. So wonderful to have you with us, Lisa. And then finally, a very familiar face, we have Aileen Consolo coming to us from Baker McKenzie. As many of you will know, Aileen is a partner there at Baker McKenzie, and is based there in Melbourne in their energy and resources team. And she specialises in energy contracting, including corporate PPAs, hedging and offtake arrangements, connection arrangements, retail arrangements, and a whole lot of other related renewable energy development and energy regulatory matters. So wonderful to have all of you here today. Before we get started today, just on the next slide, thanks, Bridget, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we all meet today, the many different lands, no doubt, and to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging of all those lands. For us here in Sydney, it's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Just quickly on the next slide, if you are in fact new to BRC-A, we are a not-for-profit organisation focused on helping corporates to purchase renewable electricity for their operating assets. We've been around for about 7 years now, and we've helped organisations to support 5 gigawatts of renewable energy projects thus far. So quite an achievement. We are also our latest goal, our new goal that we determined last year was to help our members to support the federal government's goal of 82% renewables by 2030 through 12 gigawatts of renewable energy projects supported via PPAs. So nice, ambitious target there. If you want to learn more about us, please jump on our website or get in touch with Jonathan, myself, or Bridget, or Chris Briggs, one of our other technical directors. So just on the next slide, before I hand over then to John to take it on, we have a little bit of an update for October. We've been doing a lot of work planning introductory training workshops for councils and businesses in Queensland renewable energy zones. We are funded by Queensland DEC, and they are helping us to work our way through the regions of Queensland. You can see locations and dates there where we'll be holding our 2-hour introductory workshops face-to-face. There will also be some online workshops, and a really important focus for those PPA training workshops is sharing the benefits of renewable energy with regional communities. So that's going to be a fantastic series kicking off on the 6th of November. If you are based in Queensland and you'd like to join, please do. And if you are not able to join those and would like to join the online session, just get in touch. We've also been delivering workshops, introductory training sessions in the Hunter in New England the last couple of months, finishing up in Tamworth and Armidale just a couple of weeks ago. And we are now organising our next boot camp. Hooray. For any of you that have been to the boot camp, they're really fun. It's about a 1.5-day course where we invite wonderful experts from industry such as this group along to help share their stories on how they have executed PPAs either for their own organisation or have helped others to do so. So that's on the 27th, 28th of November. You can register now. It is a greatly reduced fee this year, normally around $2,000 for the day and a half, now down to $350, and that's thanks to the support of Energy Co, who is sponsoring that work. So that's wonderful. Thanks for Energy Co's support. Very quickly, we are about to release at All Energy next week. We'll be releasing our 2024 State of the Market report. So that will go online that day. We're also launching a new fact sheet that we've developed in partnership with WWF Australia and Energetics ERM. It is essentially a social license toolkit guide, but it's in fact sheet form. It's a fantastic little resource for both developers and buyers out there looking at how you can ask for and respond to requests for information in tender processes and score those responses around those non-price criteria for social license. So that's it. We've got one more webinar after today, which will be on the storage market. So that was really quick. This webinar will be recorded. So if you missed some of it, or if you want to go back over a couple of those facts there, please jump online probably tomorrow and you'll be able to see it. And now I will hand over to Jonathan. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Very exciting to have such a great attendance today, and it's a bit of a star-studded attendee list. So really looking forward to the Q&A later, and also to have such an amazing panel today. So without further ado, let's get into it. Renewable energy certificates and energy attribution certificates exist globally with voluntary markets and often coupled with mandatory policies and options. America, for example, has its portfolio standards for utilities to drive increases in renewable energy shares. My personal favorite is iRECs in Taiwan. It sounds like something out of Jurassic Park, but they're Taiwan renewable energy certificates. Their purpose is to help promote renewable energy, reduce emissions, and reward those that take action by providing them a method of proof, measurement, and verification. In Australia, we first had the renewable energy target in 2001, led by John Howard at the time of 2%. And then leading up to the 2007 election, we had Heaven 07, if you remember, and both the party leaders proposed 20% renewable energy targets leading up to that election. And from that came the 20% renewable energy target by 2020 through to 2030. And the split into large generation certificates, LGCs, and small technology certificates, STCs. In terms of the impact of the renewable energy target and LGCs, I think that was very clear during the Tony Abbott review of the renewable energy target, where it really slowed investment in renewable energy. Even some of the distribution and transmission companies shut down their connections team because there was just no activity, no new solar and wind farms asking to connect and doing studies and so on. Then with the cancelling of that review and moving forward, it unlocked 6, 7, 8 years worth of renewable energy investment in 2 or 3 years. And we're still recovering to this day with resource shortages and slow approvals of grid connections and so on. We did have a time of low wholesale prices and low LGC prices, $40 and $20 respectively. But with Hazelwood retiring in Victoria and the RET obligations coming for retailers, that changed suddenly with wholesale rates going to $80 and LGCs up to $80, $90 at times, helping to increase the viability of new wind and solar farms. Then we saw the rise of corporate PPAs, what BRC-A specialises in. And this is a real change where corporates can take more direct action. Before, the gold standard was green power, where you could be sure that buying green power and seeing LGCs retired saw additionality, more renewable energy generated. No double counting where multiple parties can claim the renewable energy benefits. But with corporate PPAs, first started in the US by Google and Facebook and spread across corporate America and now Australia, corporates could use their energy demand to sign long-term power purchase agreements and directly underwrite finance of new wind and solar farms. So it was a new form of direct action and best practice using corporate PPAs. So that's my introduction and background. Now we'd like to get to the first question, and I'll be throwing to Aileen first, and then we'll have a discussion after. But how have the LGCs and renewable energy targets served the Australian renewable sector and electricity customers? Aileen, penny for your thoughts.
Thanks, Jonathan. That was a great summary. Look, I think the RET has served a really important purpose in developing the renewable energy industry in Australia. Since the introduction in 2001, it created demand initially from retailers who were needing to fill up their books with LGCs in order to meet the mandatory obligation. So that created demand for renewable energy, whether that be contracting with a generator or developing their own projects. And that demand takes a form of supply under a PPA, which, as you mentioned, is what underpins new projects. It provides certainty of revenue, which then allows projects to obtain financing or equity investment and get built. Since that time, as you mentioned, we've had corporates enter into the market, and retailers have really filled up their books for a few years now. And where that demand is coming from is the voluntary market. And the LGCs are playing a really key role in that space because LGCs as a regulated, or the RET as a regulated scheme administered by the Clean Energy Regulator, it gives integrity to that scheme, which then allows businesses to be able to acquire LGCs and retire LGCs, knowing that there is integrity around where those LGCs have come from, that they have been sourced from renewable energy, and then that gives them the confidence to be able to make the claims or to meet the standards of the voluntary commitments that they've signed up to. So LGCs are continuing to play a key role in that space, and are very much the driver, or major driver of businesses entering into corporate PPAs. They're doing so generally on a bundled basis, so to be able to acquire the LGCs in order to meet the voluntary targets.
Fantastic, Aileen. Lisa, I think we have strong alignment on our passion for additionality. I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with LGCs. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. Thanks for putting the webinar on to the BRC-A, and thanks for inviting me as well. Yeah, as Aileen mentioned, a lot has blossomed as a result of the RET. And as you mentioned, JP, it's not just LGCs in the grid scale, but also STCs, right? So rooftop PV has benefited greatly from the RET. It's partly why we have among the most solar per capita in the world. So it's been very effective in that sense. And the way that I think about when I read this question was what has been the impact of the RET in my mind, and how it created that was that, quite simply, it put a value on the green aspect of the electricity that was being generated. And that's extremely simple, but also very effective. And as you mentioned, that period from late 2016 through most of 2018, when LGCs were extremely high, that drove a great deal of investment into the system. Of course, as an economist, in an ideal world, this would be rather a penalty on the black, but the black electricity. But the success of the RET is really a testament to the leadership of corporates and to other bodies as well, like the BRC-A and RE100, which is well recognized globally, and corporates are keen to be able to demonstrate their leadership through things like the RE100 program. And it's really fantastic to have seen that so many corporates went beyond what was just mandatory, that ratcheting mandatory level of consumption that needed to be green or renewable, and really looking towards meeting those shifting expectations from employees and customers and lenders as well. And we know that fossil fuel assets are ending their life. They have to be replaced. So being able to have leveraged the RET to drive investments into the system to replace those retirements, not necessarily on time, but I can't imagine where we would be without the RET. It's one of those few certainties that we have had from a policy perspective, despite that review for that short period of time. But maybe just one controversial point. I feel like renewables take quite a lot of unnecessary or unfair heat, because building new renewables and generation that comes from new assets that happen to be renewable, it's not cheaper necessarily than burning the coal. But this is only because this is how we've set up the market. It's a market failure that we don't take into account the negative externalities associated with burning coal. So building RE and storage is cheaper than any alternative. So if you think about what it's really given us in the end, it's a cleaner system. It's the capability and the learnings that we need to progress the transition that needs to continue. And certainly a system that's cheaper than the alternative and those negative externalities if we had done nothing.
I think it makes me think of the 1992 Toyota Camry. It's always going to be cheaper to sweat the older asset than buy a new one, even if it's just another Camry, isn't it?
That's right.
And there's so many great points there. And one of them was around that sort of short-term price when it got to $88. And a fear I have with LGCs is the price could go super high, but if investors don't have long-term certainty that there'll still be high revenues in 5, 10, 15 years' time, that doesn't drive new investment, a short-term high price, does it? So it's really this mandatory nature of the RET for 10 to 20 years, or PPAs, the long-term pricing that helps actually underpin new investment in renewables and actual emissions reductions. Aileen's nodding.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, that's the long-term price certainty under a PPA is what gets projects banked, because that's where the certainty coming from. So yeah, to sort of simply rely on the volatility of a certificate-based market is not going to be sufficient. In the same way, relying on the volatility of a spot price to be able to sell your electricity into the pool is not sufficient generally.
The point being that a certificate alone can't drive investment. It's coupled with other policies, actions, initiatives, and so on.
Yeah, exactly. And I think going to your point around sort of additionality, that's sort of where certificates are playing the key role. So additionality in the sense that, you know, without the corporate's support, this project would not be developed. So, you know, certificates on its own don't really serve that purpose. But when when a corporate is entering into a long-term PPA that covers the purchase of certificates as well as electricity, then that is what gives certainty for the project to be developed and brings strength to the additionality argument.
And that leads into question 2. So, Lisa, would you like to sort of describe what additionality is and how certificates are best used alongside additionality?
Yeah, sure. So additionality is essentially a concept that describes impact, right? So as Aileen mentioned, you know, did the procurement action you took, did it result in renewables being added to the grid? Was an asset able to get you know, financial close as a result of the offtake that you were guaranteeing as the off taker? So that's additionality in a nutshell. So if you were to simply buy your LGCs, you know, directly from the market or a broker, yes, you eliminated your scope 2, but you can't claim additionality. And large entities, you know, I mentioned stakeholders before. Large entities have stakeholders that have high expectations. So, you know, lenders, customers, employees, communities that are keen to see the shift in the grid and the transition in the grid transformation from where it was 10 years ago to where it needs to be in the next 10 years. So buying excess LGCs from any random asset, you'd have a very difficult time convincing someone that your action has directly led to more renewables being added to the grid. But I would say that I don't think that additionality is the only way to measure impact. It's great, but it's potentially imperfect. So we need to be thinking about the value of these certificates at different times. And I think that's a future state for companies to be keeping in mind.
I was thinking a different webinar. We could have one just on that, couldn't we? And I think that additionality comment is to protect against that scenario where you sign up to a retailer, for example, that has a lot of high proportion coal generation, for example, but you buy a renewable energy contract from them, but that just sees them selling less renewable energy to the rest of their customers and no net emissions benefits. So that could be an example of not additionality. And I think for our smaller and medium buyers, if they sign up with a retailer with LGCs who is actively investing in new renewables, that's less direct, but still a form of additionality, isn't it? Julia, I see you've unmuted.
Yes, I have. So obviously, I echo what Aileen and Lisa have said in regards to the success of the RET. We see increasingly every year our large commercial industrial customers want those LGCs beyond that mandatory 20% component of their bill. We have a lot of customers increasingly that actually buy 100% LGCs and are really invested. Snowy Hydro is also coming at it from a little bit of a unique perspective, though, given that when the RET was introduced in 2001, our assets were given a baseline, and anything below that baseline, which for us is about 98% of our hydro generation, was deemed ineligible for what these LGCs we're talking about. So Snowy's in a unique position where we don't get many of those LGCs. We still provide them to our customers, though, through our own 15 PPAs, and are seeing an increase every year on that voluntary I guess, that voluntary commitment that customers are wanting to make towards those Scope 2 by those purchase of LGCs. But yes, agree with the additionality. It's been hugely success. The RET actually met its goals in 2021, so 3 years ahead of schedule. But as a hydro generator, are still fully aware that we spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year maintaining our assets, and hydro assets are built to last actually about 100, 150 years. So having that arbitrary 15-year date on an asset as to whether it was eligible for LGCs or not isn't ideal for our scenario, but we've also found a way through our PPAs and also through iRECs, which we'll come to later in the session, to ensure that we're able to deliver to those customers' demands.
And customers are sort of asking for additional things to give them great additionality claims, even in the context of retail PPAs. So where a customer is contracting with a retailer and is opting for a percentage, renewable percentage above the mandatory, often the customer will be asking for the LGCs to come from maybe particular assets that you agree, and if those assets aren't available, assets that meet a certain criteria, including with respect to when the project was developed and how long ago was the electricity generated in respect of the certificate that was created. So there are sort of various ways customers are looking for protection in that context, but also gives the flexibility to be able to achieve additionality outcomes in the context of a retail product rather than having to contract directly with a project.
Yeah, and just building on what you've said there in terms of what customers are asking for, one of the things as well that we help customers understand and deal with is the vintages of LGCs. So we wouldn't want necessarily to be retiring LGCs that were generated, 10 years ago, right? Now, because it's not necessarily the purpose of the LGC. The other thing is ensuring that in a retail PPA that both the mandatory and the voluntary proportions or portions of the LGCs are actually retired on behalf of the customer, so that when that end user is making renewable claims and communicating to the market through its financial and sustainability reports that it has achieved a specific percentage of renewable electricity consumption, that's actually lined up with what the retailer has actually retired on their behalf. So that's something for corporates to be aware of and ensure they're talking about through their contracts.
Fantastic. For reasons of time, let's get to the next two questions. And firstly, I feel I should speak about Julia's organisation, Snowy's great work on PPAs. I think it's up to 12 PPAs with new large-scale wind and solar like Tail and Bend in Solar Farm in South Australia, Warra in Victoria, and is it Bango and others in
Bango, yeah. It's actually up to 15.
15, fantastic.
Yeah, currently as it stands, our wind and solar portfolio, or those PPAs, are actually bigger from a generation sense than our own hydro assets. So it's really an interesting move. We're seeing that demand for that direct linkage to an asset increasingly. We've found, which we'll come to, particularly when we talk about iRECs, we've found a way to provide something more tangible and linkage to those hydro assets and those 7 power stations as well. But definitely that PPA portfolio is something that Snowy will look to continue to increase.
And you're in a privileged position where you've got wind, solar and hydro and pumped hydro, and therefore can supply corporate customers this sort of renewable supply agreements. And there's like Dexus in New South Wales, I think it was, and also about dozens of Victorian councils, for example, signed up to those sorts of plans.
Yeah. So we've actually got about 60 of the 70 Victorian councils. And importantly, when we talk about having the longevity and the stability for customers in the PPAs, we also offer that through our retail products as well. It's not uncommon for a customer to be buying our True Green, which is the 100% renewable energy with the 100% LGCs from those PPAs for a 10-year period. We're seeing more and more interest in those long-term agreements, which is quite interesting, Jonathan, because we do have some uncertainty coming around the LGC and the REGO scheme which is being introduced probably by mid next year, but we still are seeing customers who have the budget, who want to purchase long-term with 100% matched LGC. And then we've also got an alternative, which is the iRECs, International Renewable Energy Certificate. So as of late 2022, Snowy Hydro alongside other what we call the below baseline generators, so those who weren't and are still unable to be issued with LGCs, introduce international renewable energy certificates. So for businesses that are multinational, it's not a new concept. iRECs have been around for a long time. They are the renewable energy certificate scheme in 60 countries, and they're now in Australia. So Australia is quite unique. We do have two certificate schemes operating in parallel. There are about 16 terawatt hours of iRECs eligible, eligible for iRECs in Australia. So it isn't a small amount. It is Snowy Hydro, Tas Hydro, Statkraft are some of the bigger names. And what makes them different is it's really important our customers, we're really upfront, understand that these certificates are not additionality. They are not the LGCs, they're an alternative, and it's an auditable, traceable mechanism that customers can use to attest to where their energy is coming from and make those renewable claims credibly.
Yeah, with wind and solar, it's all about facilitating new investment, isn't it? But with hydro, you could just encourage it to generate more, and that would also reduce emissions.
I'm not sure so much encouraging to generate more. I think if we look at hydro, particularly in snowy sense, but all over the world, is built to last a long, long time, 150 years. Ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, we spend hundreds of millions of dollars just maintaining those assets. And when there was an opportunity to create an iREC, exactly the same as an LGC for every 1 megawatt hour of energy produced, that one certificate. So it's benchmark, I guess, in the same way that we looked to do that for our hydro assets, and that's what we're now generating. It's an alternative to LGCs, very distinct in that it's not that additionality, and that's not what it's there for. It is to provide that mechanism of being able to make a credible claim, and we're seeing a huge amount of interest in this in customers that want to buy renewable, 100% renewable output. They want the certification, but the LGCs are not necessarily in everyone's budget.
Lisa, for many corporates, doing their corporate PPA is a huge ticket item, takes up a lot of time, resources, mental load, nervous energy for 2 years. And then it gets done and they take a holiday and they come back and say, all right, what next? So what are you starting to see in terms of maybe like other options in carbon and renewable energy markets? Is it LGCs being applied to scope 1? Is it a focus on scope 3? Is it iRECs? International things? What are you starting to see beyond just the LGCs?
Well, first a couple things. I hope, maybe take a week holiday, but then come back and realize that when your PPA is finished, you need to be monitoring that thing, or you're leaving a heap of money potentially on the table. Your invoices could be wrong. It could not generate the right amount of LGCs that you need. Then you need to make sure that you've bought up to whatever amount you'll be communicating to markets. All kinds of things you need to understand.
And the delays, of course. So contract discussions, stakeholder communications about delays.
Yes, absolutely. So all of those things. And so delay of the asset is one thing. Once your PPA starts running, you need to be monitoring that as an asset. So take a short holiday and then be sure that you are set up for that. But in terms of the options, look, I would not say use LGCs for scope 1. there are other instruments for that, and your first instrument should be reducing your emissions and being more energy efficient so that you use less energy to start with. But there are certainly lots of other schemes globally. Each jurisdiction seems to have its own, but as Julia mentioned, the iREC is widely available. One of the things that it has been able to do is to create the opportunity for other countries to leverage that program, without having to redesign their own, and to make those energy attribute certificates available in lots of different markets. As Julia mentioned, yes, so it was below baseline was allowed to generate iRECs. Part of the benefit of an iREC is that it's a lot cheaper because the demand isn't quite there yet relative to an LGC. There's a heap of LGCs. I think it was 3.7 million iRECs issued in 2023, and only, if I recall, 350,000 were redeemed in 2023. So I think that gives you a sense of the demand for iRECs at this point. I also had a conversation with a gentleman who we've moved here to Australia from our EU operations, and he, of course, comes with that direct lived experience of what corporates are doing in the EU and other markets. Renewable assets in other markets can generate either the domestic energy attribute certificate or the iREC. And as I said before, they've been really critical in creating the opportunity and availability of iRECs elsewhere. So I think the relative view of iRECs is an interesting thing to unpack here in Australia versus, elsewhere, because here they're specifically for that below baseline at this point.
Yeah, there is a lot, and I think there's a lot still probably unknown. I can say Snowy has contracted $4 million of iREC sales to date. The scheme only came in late 2022, and it did take us a little while to kind of get off the ground and start selling. So to us, I think that is that's a decent amount. But I think what's also important is increasingly customers who have been what we call buying black or progressive purchasing historically, or buying the true green, which is that premium 100% LGC, 100% renewable energy product, are increasingly coming to us and saying, we want to do more, we want to move towards a more sustainable position, but is there the budget and or the internal appetite to do that? And there's not always. And that iREC product of ours, which is net zero match, which has got that direct output from one of the hydropower stations, with the matching of the certificate from that station's generation as well, is providing an option that if it wasn't there, they might not start that journey. So for us, it's something that increasingly we're having existing customers come to us about, but also new as well, and we'll hope to facilitate more customers on that renewable transition through it.
Got some great questions coming in. And we'll leave them to the end after a question 4 I've got written here. But Anne Fitzsimmons does ask, can iRECs be used to address Scope 2, and what are the benefits?
iRECs are recognised internationally, Greenhouse Gas Protocol, CDP. iRECs are also recognised by RE100, but through a technical criteria change, so the requirement change that came in, there is now a limitation on the iRECs being from a device or a power station or wind and solar farm that is less than 15 years old. So iRECs are accepted by RE100, but there is that caveat, so you do have to ensure that where you're purchasing from does meet that extra requirement. B Corp certification accepts iRECs. Pretty much everyone I can say internationally, all those sustainability frameworks absolutely accept iRECs towards a Scope 2. However, in Australia, our current legislative framework is centred around green power and LGCs. It's not that iRECs aren't allowed per se, but currently as it stands, they are formally recognised by those international frameworks. And so where we're seeing the interest, Jonathan, are customers who aren't mandated under the Australian frameworks, but also customers who have that multinational presence. They're already using the iRECs. It's their currency, and they want that international framework recognition, and that's what iRECs have.
Fantastic. Aileen, post 2030, there will be no renewable energy target demand anymore from the retailers, and many PPAs will be finishing. The market may be very different. How can corporates plan for this?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. As I think Julia mentioned, sort of despite the uncertainty as to what is happening post 2030, we have still continued to see demand from corporates and contracting for green certificates, whether they are LGCs or something else that replaces them beyond 2030. And that commitment is being driven by voluntary commitments to the emission reduction. So there is a level of confidence that when the RET expires, that there will be something that replaces it. And that is in the context where we didn't know what might replace it, but now we do actually have greater certainty as to what is going to be coming after the RET, and that is the proposed REGO scheme. So that has been under consultation for quite some time. It did take longer than we were expecting for the draft legislation to come out, but now the bill has been released. Not sure when it will be passed as law, but probably looking like first half of next year. The REGO scheme is designed to be complementary to the RET, so there will be a period of time where they sit alongside together, but then it will extend beyond that. And it's primarily aimed at the voluntary market. So we're not looking at a mandatory commitment at this stage. REGOs will be very much like LGCs in that one REGO will be can be created from 1 megawatt of renewable energy. The accredited power stations under the existing RET scheme will be eligible to create REGOs, but there will be some additional features under the REGO scheme that I think makes it really interesting. One is that they will be time-stamped, so REGOs can be created in respect of a particular period, an hour, or it's contemplated other periods, month, calendar year as well, and different options that will be prescribed under rules that are to follow. The certificate itself will also allow for details relating to the facility that created those certificates to be recorded. So the age, the type of generation, where it was located. Those additional features will assist, I think, in the voluntary market, because they're the kinds of details that are important to corporates, particularly when they're trying to match their load against the renewable energy on a time location basis, so that strengthens their claims and creates more options in that context. The other interesting thing is that storage projects will be able to create REGOs if the storage, if the energy used or stored by the project is directly coming from a renewable facility, or if REGOs or LGCs are retired against the energy that's stored and then generated. So that'll be an interesting development. So it does open up to supporting to 24/7 claims, because you can have storage sort of filling the gap when the wind isn't blowing and the sun's not shining, according to when you're using electricity. So it will be interesting to see how the market develops, and also whether there's different pricing that comes about, whether it's a storage REGO or a solar REGO or a wind REGO. So that's all to come. And the other interesting thing as well is that there will be REGOs that can be created based on an aggregated system. So that's primarily aimed at sort of aggregation of small generators to be able to sort of come together, like we see in the energy market, acting as if they were one big generator, but also being able to create REGOs on that basis. So, I think that opens up to some interesting products in the market.
It certainly does. I'll just also add, Bridget, if you could add into the chat for people, we've got a related question to the previous question around understanding the difference between LGCs and RECs. And just back on that previous question that Julia answered, we have a fact sheet that we popped out, meeting your sustainability targets with renewable electricity, a couple of months ago, and that looks at things like renewable electricity sources and attributes, and what is accepted by 5 of those initiatives, including the RE100, Science-Based Targets, Neighbours, Green Star, and Climate Active. So if you want to have a look at that, that's free and it's available on our website. Just back to you.
Thanks so much, Jackie. And Julia, any other thoughts post 2030?
Post 2030. So there has been a little bit of uncertainty, as Aileen said. I do think there's more information that has come out quite recently around that future Made in Australia, that REGO scheme. I think the more information that's available to customers, then they're able to make those informed choices. So I think it's good, although it is, a lot more work to do those time stamping. I think it's absolutely progress. From a customer perspective, the way we're tackling that transition period, so LGCs will end at the end of 2030, and it will be that REGO market. The absolute specifics are still a little bit unknown. We're offering customers right now who want those longer term agreements the ability just to swap out. So that LGC, they will be able to swap out for that REGO or an iREC. So we're still putting those long-term agreements and giving our customers that confidence that they can purchase in that long-term way and budget for. And when the certificate clarity becomes clearer, then they will be able to opt into which scheme they actually want.
Fantastic. And we had a question from Adam Firmstone. What does the panel feel has been the impact of the delay in the formation of the Go-REGO scheme and the lack of clarity about post-2030 market? I wouldn't say it's seen a delay in investment or PPAs or anything like that. Have you seen much, Lisa?
No, I think it's the market knows it's ending. The market knows we're moving to REGOs. There are, as Julie's just mentioned, there's clauses that can be put into contracts with all of the retailers under a retail PPA to move from an LGC to a REGO or an iREC, yes. And so I don't feel like that uncertainty has had too much impact from an end user's perspective, being able to engage with the market to get a PPA. The one thing that I would note is that we need to be sure that somehow a transparent market is created for the REGOs, very similar to what we have for the LGCs, to ensure the best outcomes for end users in the market.
I think that is, as I say, I have a love-hate relationship with LGCs, and their simplicity and transparency are 2 real awesome benefits, I think. And it is tempting to think of more time of day and different clever things to do with these REGOs, but simplicity can have its benefits, can't it? So Tristan Edis asks, are there any projects in Australia that are less than 15 years old which are creating iRECs, I wonder? Therefore, are any of the Snowy Hydro's iRECs actually eligible under the 100% RE program?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
you know how to answer this?
Yeah, so I can say the last time I checked the very public iREC device register, I don't believe there are any, and there wouldn't be, because without going into too much commercials, obviously LGCs are more expensive than an iREC. So you wouldn't be producing that iREC. If you've got an asset less than 15 years old, you would be eligible for the LGC, and that's what I would do, and that's what they're doing. And no, none of our power stations, or what we call devices in the iREC world, are eligible for RE100. That's an unfortunate circumstance, but at the same time, it is what it is. RE100 is there to serve a really good purpose, and that's what it does. And I guess I just reiterate, you look at countries, particularly Japan, and then, we've got our hydro assets here, Snowy and Tassie. Those assets are built to last a lot more than 15 years and cost, in many instances, a lot more than building a wind and solar farm just to maintain. So unfortunately not RE100 eligible, and don't know any that would generate iREC for now rather than LGC.
Yeah, and again, to highlight, our international customers are very comfortable with iRECs. And if you think back to one of the first things I said around what an LGC was doing, and what the RET did, it was putting a price, putting a benefit on the green. And to be fair, hydro below baseline or otherwise is renewable energy. Full stop.
Fantastic. I think we've spoken a lot about iRECs today, so let's do a non-iREC question here. Alan Ray asks, crystal ball question, to what extent do you expect a time of day pricing differential to emerge for solar regos versus wind regos versus storage regos? Aileen, did you have a thought on this? And maybe
yeah, look, I mean, I suppose that is the big unknown, but potentially, I mean, it's as you said, Jonathan, there's some benefits to simplicity. So time of day matching is not for everyone, and so I think the question really becomes, well, how many businesses are really looking to time match their load, and to the extent that there is a significant demand, then that could create a market that's recognizing different values according to the abundance of a certificate in a particular time period. But yeah, I mean, that's interesting, and we could go that way.
Because that part is voluntary potentially, isn't it? Where corporates could decide to do it that way, but no one's contemplating it being mandatory.
No, and look, the time, so the regos will record a time period, but there's going to be optionalities as to what that time period is. So I think the default is an hour, but there could be up to a year, for example. So there will be flexibility within the rego scheme to meet the different requirements of the users.
So as a tool, a rego will have the timestamp. So if voluntary corporates and others want to do it, they can. And it could, if there is more demand on certain times of day, it could see price differentials if 10-20% of the market went that way, hypothetically.
I think that's right. Yeah.
And Lisa, as it stands, wind and solar are still getting LGCs as an incentive. I won't say subsidy or rebate or anything, as an incentive. Whereas there's not much for battery storage at the moment, is there? There's some rebates around and contributions, but no sort of environmental market. And to me, to reduce emissions, we need more storage to unlock that wind and solar that's being curtailed or not invested.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of what the rego will do. I mean, certainly there's not just the energy market, but the FCAS markets that batteries in particular can participate in, that won't be the bulk of the revenue going forward. But just one last thing I would mention on the time stamping and regos and how these might have different values of time. One of the fastest growing areas of demand is in data centers and cloud service providers. And as we all know, some of those largest companies have committed to the UN Global Compact for 24/7 carbon-free energy. And so it will be very interesting to see how those companies solve for that. And it could be something that drives different time value on these regos in the future market.
My thinking on this 24/7 and what Google are investigating, for example, is don't skip the additionality part. Get your new wind and solar farms going first and then go to 24/7 rather than skipping straight to 24/7. Jackie, anything we've missed in the Q&A? I think I've had some fantastic questions and interactions with the attendees.
There have been some great questions still in there. There's a little question there around additionality being claimed for STC installations. Lisa, I think you were mentioning STCs earlier. That's probably a fairly easy one for you to answer.
Yeah, sure. So STCs as an instrument is just a regulatory instrument, if you will. But if you've built assets on your rooftop, I mean, in the concept of additionality, if you've paid for that asset, then you've added renewables to the grid in terms of the concept of the word additionality.
That's the principle, isn't it? You've financed new renewables. And I remember NCOS, National Carbon Offsetting Standard, changed that ruling, 8 years ago, whatever it was. And that for me confirmed it, that is additionality if you're putting solar on the roof, even if you accept the STCs.
NCOS, that's an old term. That's climate active now, I think.
Yeah.
But yes, good memory there. Thanks very much for that. We have a couple more questions here. There's an interesting one also around would iREC or GHG protocol incorporate any additionality requirements in the near future? So I guess that comes back again to, I mean, obviously the GHG protocol is the basis for most of our sustainability initiatives out there, being the RE100 and Science-Based Targets Initiative. But I guess, a little bit around the iRECs there, as I think Lisa probably covered earlier, what those really allow for in terms of iRECs. But is there anything additional you wanted to mention there? It's pretty much as is for the protocol. Yeah, that's right. So I think that really that have a little look at that sustainability guide that we put out, and that really does go into that detail there. Another one here, Australia has traditionally been a short-term tenor PPA market. What trends are the panel seeing in relation to tenor or term? And is the market moving towards longer tenor? That would be an interesting one probably for Aileen and Lisa, and also Julia probably to be able to answer there.
Yeah, I think on a sort of global perspective, particularly if you're looking at within APAC, Australia is a shorter term tenure PPA market. I haven't seen any signs of that changing. I mean, for quite some time, PPAs were being signed up until the end of the RET because there was concern around what would happen when the RET it would expire. As we've got closer and closer, that period is just too short to have a PPA to underpin a new project. When you're talking about a PPA in the context of a direct agreement with the developer as opposed to a retail product. I don't think so. At least on the corporate side, there are no signs from my perspective of wanting to, and a generalization, wanting to go contract longer. It can be difficult from an internal approval perspective to enter into a long-term agreement. Corporate customers might not necessarily be able to predict their load over a long period of time. So, I think even though once the REGO scheme is introduced, and that would take away the uncertainty, I don't think that will solve all the issues in terms of what the current restrictions are or the hesitations are in contracting longer. It's really sort of a few examples of corporates who are willing to do that and where they can get a really good price in exchange.
Yeah, I would agree from a retail perspective. The trend towards those shorter terms is unchanged. One nuance for VPPAs, customers understand that for a virtual power purchase agreement, those longer terms are required normally to get an asset off the ground. So I think that's still the same as has been previously as well, is that that's where you see those longer terms and customers are understanding of those.
Great.
Yeah, sorry, Jackie.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, from a sewing perspective, as I said, we're growing that PPA portfolio, that buying the energy output, and also certificates from a wholesale perspective. We're doing really long-term deals. So Stowe is probably a little bit of an anomaly maybe. And we're also seeing increasing interest from customers in doing those longer term. When I say longer term, it's all relative, but I'm talking 9, 10 year agreements.
10-year plus, exactly right. Yeah. And our report will, our State of the Market report will address that term question as well. So it'll be interesting to see if it reflects your experiences in the market there. Fantastic. Thank you all so much. Everyone, please virtually thank our wonderful panel today. They've been fabulous. And Jonathan also for driving the panel through to answer our questions as well. Apologies if we didn't get to your question. Just before we go, Bridget, if you could pop up the slide.
Thanks so much.
Please do join us at All Energy. You'll see Aileen again. We'll also be joined by Neoen, Asahi Beverages, Energetics and WWF as we look at some of the emerging trends coming out of the State of the Market report that we will launch there. And as I mentioned earlier, we've got a wonderful fact sheet that we've developed there together with WWF and Energetics around some of those non-price criteria and how you address and score those. So thank you all so much, and we hope to see you in Melbourne next week. Take care.
Jackie.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Bridget.